I remember it was late October when I first heard about the old St. Mary's orphanage on the outskirts of town. The place had been abandoned for decades, and local legends painted it as a haunt of restless spirits. Growing up, I'd always been skeptical of ghost stories, but there was something about the orphanage that tugged at my curiosity. Maybe it was the way the place seemed to loom in the distance whenever I drove by, or the stories my grandfather used to tell about the mysterious lights flickering in its windows at night. On a brisk Saturday afternoon, with the wind howling and leaves swirling like a kaleidoscope of reds and oranges, I decided to finally pay the orphanage a visit. I grabbed my flashlight, donned a thick jacket, and set out alone. Most of my friends thought I was crazy, but I needed to see it for myself. The walk to the orphanage was eerie. The sky was overcast, casting a grey pallor over everything. As I approached the building, its towering, Gothic architecture became more imposing. The windows were shattered, and the doors hung ajar, as if inviting me into its depths. A rusted gate, barely hanging onto its hinges, creaked loudly with the wind, setting the tone for what lay ahead. I hesitated at the threshold, taking in the musty smell of decay and the faint scent of something else, something metallic. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside. The air was thick and cold, and the floorboards groaned under my weight. The main hall was a vast, cavernous space littered with debris. Old toys, broken furniture, and dusty papers lay scattered about. The walls were covered in faded, peeling wallpaper, and an eerie silence filled the room, interrupted only by the distant sound of dripping water. As I explored, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed to dance in the corners of my vision, but whenever I turned to look, nothing was there. I told myself it was just my imagination, heightened by the ominous atmosphere. In one of the smaller rooms, I found an old, tattered notebook. The pages were yellowed with age, but the writing was still legible. It was a diary, kept by a young girl named Lily. Her entries were filled with the mundane happenings of orphanage life, but the last few pages took a darker turn. She wrote about strange noises at night and shadows that moved on their own. Her final entry ended abruptly with, "They're coming for me." A shiver ran down my spine, and I decided it was time to leave. But as I made my way back through the main hall, I heard it, a faint, melodic humming. It was the voice of a child, echoing softly through the corridors. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed the sound, drawn to it despite my fear. The humming led me to a narrow staircase, descending into the darkness of the basement. Every instinct told me to turn back, but I couldn't resist. With each step down, the air grew colder, and the humming grew louder, more insistent. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a large, dimly lit room. In the center stood a lone rocking chair, gently swaying as if recently occupied. The humming ceased, replaced by a deafening silence. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows across the walls. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and I was plunged into darkness. Panic set in as I fumbled with the flashlight, desperately trying to get it to work. In those moments of pitch black, I felt a presence, a cold, unseen force pressing in around me. When the light finally came back on, I was alone in the room, but the rocking chair was still moving. The air was charged with a malevolent energy, and I knew I had to get out. I raced up the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls, and didn't stop until I burst through the front door, gulping in the fresh air outside. I never went back to the orphanage after that. The experience left me shaken, and to this day, I can't explain what I encountered. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe there was something more sinister at work. All I know is that the abandoned building still stands, waiting for the next curious soul to venture inside. The summer before our senior year was sweltering, and the heat seemed to ignite our sense of invincibility. There were 4 of us: Mark, Jenna, Ethan, and me. We'd grown up together in our small town, always pushing each other's limits, and this summer was no different. We were lounging in Jenna's backyard one day, talking about who among us was the bravest. "I'm telling you," Mark said, grinning smugly, "none of you have the guts to do a real test of courage." "Oh, please," Jenna retorted. "I'm not scared of anything," Ethan chimed in. "What about the old hospital on the hill? You know, the one that burned down 5 years ago? I heard it's haunted." The idea sent a shiver of excitement through us. Everyone in town knew about St. Mercy's Hospital. It had been abandoned after a devastating fire that claimed the lives of dozens of patients and staff. The place was said to be haunted by those who perished, their spirits unable to leave the charred ruins. We all agreed this would be our test of courage. The plan was simple: explore the hospital at night and document our experience. It was a challenge none of us could resist. On a moonlit Friday night, we met at the edge of the hospital grounds. The air was thick with humidity, and the crickets sang a relentless chorus. We each carried flashlights and our phones to capture whatever we encountered. The hospital loomed in the distance, its skeletal structure silhouetted against the starry sky. As we approached, the smell of smoke and charred wood still lingered in the air. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. We climbed over the rusted gate and made our way inside. The main lobby was a cavernous space filled with debris and the remnants of the past. Old hospital beds lay overturned, and faded medical charts littered the floor. "Let's split up and meet back here in an hour," Ethan suggested, his voice echoing in the empty space. We reluctantly agreed and headed in different directions. Jenna and I took the east wing, while Mark and Ethan headed west. The east wing was a maze of hallways, each one leading deeper into the hospital's darkened interior. As we walked, our flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Doors creaked on their hinges, and the air was filled with a suffocating silence. "Do you hear that?" Jenna whispered, stopping abruptly. I strained to listen. At first there was nothing, but then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It seemed to be coming from one of the patient rooms ahead. We exchanged nervous glances but pushed forward, our curiosity outweighing our fear. The tapping grew louder as we approached room 104. The door was ajar, and I could see the room's interior bathed in a pale, ghostly light. Inside, the tapping continued, though we couldn't see the source. The room was empty, except for a single hospital bed in the center. I stepped closer, and the tapping abruptly stopped. The sudden silence was unnerving. We stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Then, Jenna's phone rang, startling us both. The screen flashed with Mark's name. "Mark, what's up?" Jenna answered, her voice trembling slightly. There was a crackling sound on the line, followed by Mark's voice, panicked and breathless. "You have to get out of there. We saw something. Someone. It's not safe." The call abruptly ended, leaving us in stunned silence. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to process what we'd just heard. "Come on, we have to find the others and get out of here," I urged, grabbing Jenna's arm. As we retraced our steps, the hospital seemed to come alive around us. Shadows flitted at the edges of our vision, and the sound of distant whispers filled the air. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath in the flashlight's beam. We finally reached the main lobby, where Mark and Ethan were waiting, their faces pale and drawn. "What happened?" I demanded. Ethan shook his head, visibly shaken. "We saw something. It was like a shadow, but it moved like it was alive. We couldn't see its face, but it was watching us." Mark nodded, his bravado from earlier gone. "We tried to get back to you, but it was like the hallways kept changing. We barely made it out. We didn't wait to see what else might lurk in the hospital's depths. As a group, we fled the building, our footsteps echoing in the abandoned halls. Once outside, we didn't stop running until we were far from the hospital's haunting presence. Standing at the edge of the grounds, gasping for breath, we looked back at the dark silhouette of St. Mercy's Hospital. Whatever we'd encountered in there was beyond explanation, and none of us wanted to test our courage again. As we walked home, the night seemed darker, and the world felt a little less certain. We didn't talk much about what happened that night, but the experience lingered with us, a reminder that some places are better left undisturbed. The bravest thing we did was leaving that hospital behind. I had always been drawn to small towns, with their quiet streets and close-knit communities. So when I was offered a new job in Maplewood, I jumped at the chance to move there. It was a picturesque little town, nestled among rolling hills and dense forests. I arrived in late August, the days still long and warm, and the town seemed idyllic. My new home was an old Victorian house at the edge of town. It had a quaint charm, with its creaky wooden floors and an overgrown garden that gave it a mysterious air. The locals were friendly, welcoming me with open arms and stories about the town's history. But there was one place they rarely mentioned, the old Sinclair Manor. Sinclair Manor was a sprawling, abandoned mansion just outside town, shrouded in mystery and rumors. It had been empty for decades, ever since a fire claimed the lives of its last occupants. The town had always whispered about the manor being haunted, but most dismissed it as just stories. As the days passed and I settled into my new routine, the manor began to intrigue me. I could see it from my bedroom window, looming in the distance, a dark silhouette against the sky. The more I heard about it, the more I felt compelled to visit. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I decided to take a walk and clear my head. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and I found myself drawn towards Sinclair Manor. I told myself it was just curiosity. There was no harm in looking. The path to the manor was overgrown, the weeds almost hiding the old cobblestones. As I walked, the air grew cooler, and an unnatural stillness settled around me. The manor stood before me, its windows like empty eyes staring out at the world. Despite the decay, there was a certain elegance to it, a reminder of its former glory. I hesitated at the entrance, the massive wooden doors slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. The air smelled of damp and mold, and I could hear the distant sound of something skittering across the floor. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the vast foyer. Dust motes danced in the fading light, and the air was thick with the scent of smoke and charred wood. The walls were lined with faded portraits, their eyes following me as I moved deeper into the house. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. I wandered through the rooms, each one filled with the remnants of a life long gone. A grand piano stood in the corner of the parlor, its keys yellowed with age. In the library, shelves bowed under the weight of forgotten books. As I explored, a sense of unease settled over me. It felt as if the house was watching me, waiting for something. I shook off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. I found myself drawn to the second floor, the staircase groaning under my weight. The air grew colder as I climbed, and the shadows seemed to deepen, pressing in around me. I reached the top of the stairs and found a long hallway stretching out before me. At the end of the hallway was a door slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beyond. I felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as if something on the other side was calling me. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty, save for a single rocking chair facing the window. The air was frigid, and I could see my breath clouding in the flashlight's beam. As I moved closer, the chair began to rock gently, as if someone had just left it. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I couldn't look away. The room seemed to vibrate with energy, and I was overwhelmed by a sense of grief and longing. I could almost hear the faint echo of voices, the sound of laughter and music from a time long past. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged through me, and I fumbled for my phone, desperately trying to find the flashlight app. My heart pounded in my chest, the silence around me deafening. When the light finally came on, I was alone, but the room felt different, charged with a presence I couldn't see. I backed away slowly, my hand on the doorknob, ready to bolt at the first sign of movement. As I turned to leave, I heard it, a soft, mournful whisper. "Please don't go." The voice was faint, almost lost in the shadows, but it filled me with a profound sadness. I stood frozen for a moment, then pulled the door open and fled down the hallway. I didn't stop running until I was outside, gasping for breath in the cool night air. The manor loomed behind me, silent and still, as if nothing had happened. I knew I should leave, put the whole experience behind me, but something compelled me to look back one last time. In the window of the room I had just left, I saw a figure, a woman in a long, flowing dress. She stood there, watching me, her expression filled with sorrow. I blinked, and she was gone, leaving only the shadows behind. I made my way back to my house, my mind racing with questions. What had I seen in Sinclair Manor? Was it just my imagination, or something more? I didn't know, and maybe I never would. But one thing was certain: I wouldn't be going back there anytime soon. The town might have moved on from the tragedy of Sinclair Manor, but the past lingered in those dark halls, waiting for someone to listen to its stories. Thanks for watching.